things that you're liable to fulfill. So will you encompass them in your zakah year or not? Will you encompass them in your zakah year or not? In other words, will you pay zakah on those items as well? So you gave a very brief loan, a personal loan, or you've taken a personal loan, and the individual who has given you that loan is thinking, shall I pay zakah on what I've given to this person or not? So I've summarized some aspects in the past sessions, but a basic summary in terms of these short-term liabilities, as well as aspects that you've given to others and you expect it back. So the scholars, they've summarized, and I made a chart right before the session. Short-term liabilities, yes, you encompass them in your hawl, right, in your zakah here. Long-term liabilities, so generally you can give zakah on that if it's an individual who's a trustworthy person that is going to, inshallah, pay you back, and they see that, you see that they're paying you back, etc. But if you wish to do a partial zakah on that, like for example, divide the amount in half, or in aspects which are already being returned to you as per the trajectory that you agreed upon, then you can, you can give zakah on that amount, and the rest of it, for example, if it expands 10 years, 15 years, 12 years, a long amount of time, then you don't need to, once again, give zakah on that. You can give it on the partial amount. Debt's repayable in 12 months, yes. You give zakah on that. Debt's not repayable in 12 months, there's no zakah on that. Installment payments which expand across 12 months, you give zakah on that. Outstanding living expenses, for example, that is a liability, you give zakah on that. The goods that you purchased on credit, once again, goods that are going to be now utilized for business perhaps, you will give zakah on that, regardless of if you purchase them with debt. Outstanding salaries, so for example, it's a liability, you are the one, once again, getting the salary in lieu of your work, there will be zakah on that. Unpaid dowry, which is payable in a year, there will be zakah on that. And if it expands beyond that, like I mentioned, then once again, the individual who is the recipient of that dowry, in this case the wife, then she will not give zakah on that if she doesn't want to, if it's something that is unexpected. Once again, many people, they have these dowry problems. You should fulfill your dowries. Your mahar is an amana, right? Personal loans which are repayable in a year, yes, there will be zakah on that. Commercial loans which once again expand throughout a year, yes, you will pay zakah on that as well. In details, we've summarized, or we've gone through the details of these aspects, but this is just a summary of all of that to hopefully encompass the situation in a very easy manner. All right. And then the last, Mahmoud, please sit down. Yes. So I went back to Dr. Ma'an's, Mahmoud, Odd, sit down. It's disturbing when you're running around. طيب. So I went back to Dr. Ma'an's latest fatwa from 2019, and yes, there's a bit of clarification that is required here. Inshallah, I'll pull up the slide as well from his actual fatwa. So, like we mentioned, an ikhtilaf, a difference of opinion among the fuqaha, is a rahmah. It's a mercy, right? And each and every one of them, they've tried their level best in reference to modern day issues. Sometimes they got it right, and according to others who believe that's right, you'll find in in the entirety of the issues, you'll find people who say that logic doesn't make sense. Or for example, another person says, no, that logic does make sense. Or the second opinion makes sense to me. So this is all an effort on part of our scholars, that they try their best. And if you look at the scholarly opinions in regards to modern day issues, they are vast. I was making a subtle joke last week saying that you can invite 3 financial Islamic scholar experts to the community and end up with 50 opinions, right? So it doesn't mean that if an opinion is wrong, then it doesn't deserve to be mentioned. It's the integrity of ilm that we mention the opinions and we say, well, this is not really suitable, right? So the first opinion is, like we mentioned, this comes from a lot of the Indo-Pak subcontinent ulama, that you give the zakah on the full value of your investment account, which is very impractical. It's very difficult to do. You would not do that, for example, on an initial salary. You will minus taxes. You will have various, perhaps, payments that you'll have to make, house payments. You're not going to say, okay, because I expect, $75,000 or $150,000 this year as my salary, an initial salary, I'm going to pay zakah on that whole amount. No. So this is an opinion. You can discard it, but for the sake of ilmi integrity, we mention it. طيب. The second opinion that Dr. Ma'an mentions in his article is there's no zakah until withdrawal on investment accounts. So no zakah is due until the funds become accessible. So as you take out the funds, you discharge the zakah on the available funds. What is the reasoning behind that? One of the conditions for zakatable funds is that you have full ownership and access. So others could dispute that and say, well, this was a willful investment, right? But nonetheless, this is the second opinion. Zakah is only due upon death, disability, or reaching retirement age when the funds become accessible. So when you get an accessibility to those funds, you pay zakah. This is the second opinion he mentions. And then his preference, this is the preferred opinion. I would say if you don't have the ability to do this, then go for this at the least. But don't opt to not pay zakah at all. طيب. Sheikh Ma'an, his preferred opinion is that zakah is mandatory only on the portion that can be withdrawn under emergency or humanitarian reasons. So for example, if there are taxes that have to be minused, penalties that have to be minused, then you don't give zakah on those aspects. But you will give zakah on the net profit or the net investment that you can take out at that time. So for example, a person has $100,000 in their investment account, whatever it may be. It could be a 401k, it could be a Roth IRA or another investment account. But after, just for example's sake, penalties and taxes, etc., they end up with taking, they end up looking at their account and saying, if I was to withdraw any money from this account, it would perhaps be only $50,000 that I could withdraw, right? So then the zakatable amount will be $50,000 and not $100,000. If this you're not able to do, then at least opt for the second opinion where you will give zakah on the withdrawal amounts that you withdraw after you retire or whenever the amounts become accessible. His preferred opinion is the third opinion. It's always good to keep some cash at hand or open investment accounts in order to fulfill your zakah. The third one, or the second opinion, the risks I would say are if death comes about. You basically accumulated money, you didn't pay any zakah on it once death reached you. Another fallback would be your family doesn't fulfill the dues of your account. Then Allahu A'lam, who bears the burden of that sin? So he says that my preferred opinion is this third opinion, where zakah is only mandatory on what was the word we used last week? The net amounts. The net amounts that can be that if you were to withdraw under humanitarian or emergency situations, then you would be able to withdraw that amount. So in the example that we gave, 50,000 out of the 100,000, just for example's sake. Of course, the tax brackets might be different and the penalty brackets might be different as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. The calculation, inshallah, Brother Amin showed me how to, format it in a better way through another program. So inshallah, just bear with these messy slides for now, and for future reference, inshallah, we'll have more clear slides that will be visible here as well as on your computer. So the withdrawn amount is zakatable after deducting all applicable taxes, penalties, right, and what they call interest or administrative fees, as we've already mentioned, that'll be the zakatable amount. Does that make sense? طيب, inshallah. So for example, you lose your job, or you don't have any money anymore and you need to break that 401k, مثلا, and you break that, it's a humanitarian reason for yourself. Or for example, somebody in your family went through a drastic trial and tribulation, and you need to help them out with that money, and the only option that you have is to break that account. Then what would be the amount that you're getting in that situation where you break that account? That will be no. So upon death, disability, or reaching retirement, it's not the same. No, it's not. This is if you were to withdraw. That can be. Inshallah. For this third opinion, zakah on withdrawable amount only, in the case where you have to, for example, calculate your 401k zakatable portion. Let me open the slide. Khair, inshallah. Yes, go. Okay. Inshallah, we'll have the I'll pull up the document right here, inshallah. And we can read through it. And hopefully I can, once again, just modify the wording for future's reference. Okay. Bismillah.
Can you repeat that? So the first opinion is like you are paying on the total value. So I have $100,000 in my 401k, and today is 1st of Ramadan. I will say, okay, I have $100,000, 2.5% of it, right? The second opinion is I will not pay $100,000 this year because I'm not eligible to withdraw that. It's not accessible to me. It's not full ownership and accessible. So I will not pay zakat at all on it this year. Next year also not next year, until those three conditions are met, where it has been withdrawn on my death, or it has been withdrawn on my age of retirement, right? So for next 20 years, I won't pay any zakat. I'm 40, for example, and if I'm retiring in 60, I'm eligible to withdraw, and then I will withdraw. So that would be accessible at that time. The third opinion is that middle opinion, where you are again calculating on the 1st of Ramadan, in this example, $100,000. But if I withdraw right now $100,000, I will have to pay 10% penalty. I'm example of 401k. So that is gone 10%. Then I have to also pay based on my bracket, another taxes or other kind of stuff. Then total would be $80,000. So now instead of paying in the first opinion $100,000 amount, I will be paying on $80,000 on every year basis. So that's the third opinion.
Jazakumullahu khairan. Is that clear? If I were to read this again, it would just be basically the same as what Ibrahim has mentioned right now.
Can I just make a comment on this? So these accounts, the retirement accounts, whether they are IRA or 401k or Roth IRA, so basically these are the savings, which go towards these accounts. So that is the extra money that we don't need, and they go into account. So at the end of 12 months, the zakat becomes obligatory on those. The only difference is that what is the amount? The amount is you always have access to the accounts, no matter how old you are. You can have access to your account whether you're 40 or 50 or whatever. It just depends. At the retirement age, then you can withdraw it without the penalty, but you still have to pay taxes. But if you draw it without that, so there is 10% penalty plus is the taxes. The taxes depend on your tax bracket. If you're making $1 million, it's going to be like 40% or more. If you're making only 75, so it will be only 25%. So if you think that you don't have to pay it, that means you would keep accumulating like hundreds and thousands of dollars and never pay zakat on that till you withdraw it when you're 70. Well, what happened to all the years before?
That's exactly like I told you. So this is why I started, please wait. That's why I started with this disclaimer that there will always be these arguments back and forth, because either the scholars didn't think of the matter thoroughly, or they thought of it thoroughly, but then this is what you the ability that you end up with, or at the end of the day they've stated it as as is. So that is one of the that is one of the objections. That's why Dr. Ma'an, he says, now once again I want to reiterate that out of ilmi integrity, it's very important to mention the aqwal that are there. If something doesn't make sense to you or you don't adhere to it, then that is fine, right? That is something that is fine. But he mentions that I adopt the third opinion since it considers both factors, right? Mandating zakah on investment and stipulating accessibility to accounts. So he takes into the factor of having the accessibility to the account, the investment account, as well as paying the zakah on your investment and just not letting it loose without zakah. But what you're mentioning, Dr. Sab, I would say that if you're unable to do this, then at least don't forego the second opinion as well.
And
Yes.
the other thing is that if you happen to be rich and have plenty of money, you will never use these accounts. And they will pass on to your children and grandchildren. So who is going to pay zakat on that then?
Exactly. So that is where the risk factor, as we mentioned, lays, where we say that who guarantees that people who are withdrawing from that portion, or once again taking that whole amount and withdrawing it, who guarantees that they will pay zakah on that?
So just sorry to interrupt. The second opinion, if you're going with, make sure your will states that clearly.
Exactly.
Under your will that these accounts I have and they have to be paid zakat eligible. When you
Exactly.
work with Dr. Mirali, Uncle Mirali, you will find that you will have provisions to provide that under your will. So make sure you have stated all those provisions clearly.
Yeah.
But
the once again, the adequate method, I would say, is give zakah on a yearly basis on the accessible amount. That's once again you doing your due diligence. And I would say to begin with that in one way or another, it's a willful investment. You didn't have to do that, although, as once again we can get into that debate again, is that darar or not? Is that you incurring a harm or not by you not investing? Right? That is once again a debatable item. But at the end of the day, you got into that investment. So now you do your due diligence and pay zakah on it. And like we mentioned the example, and Brother Adnan said that might be just one person or a rarity, that people are at times putting almost their entire funds into these accounts, and they are worth millions of dollars, but they don't pay zakah every year. Why? Because they fear the aspect of the penalty, and they don't want to withdraw money from these investment accounts. So like you mentioned, it's probably a rarity, right? These people like this, it's an anomaly, but once again, this does exist, and we don't want to be part and parcel of that category. Suffices for us to focus on the ayah where Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ وَلَا يُنْفِقُونَها فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Whoever has savings and they don't pay for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in charity, then give them the glad tidings of a severe punishment. So try your best to adopt the third opinion. I'm saying in the case where you're not going to do that, in the case where you don't have the ability to, or the leisure to break your 401, to give money on what's present, as Dr. Ma'an mentions in the third opinion, then at least don't forego the second opinion as well, and start giving zakah on the amounts that you withdraw. That's what I mentioned. I didn't say that this is the opinion that you take. I'm saying if you're not able at all, despite how much you try, to give zakah on what you've accumulated here, on the accessible amounts, then at least don't forego the second opinion as well, if the first opinion seems absurd to you. Yes.
I just want to follow up. I understand totally what Dr. Rahman said. The issue is when you say emergency or humanitarian reasons, if you go to CAT 401k, hardship, you can take out 50,000 without penalties. And then like Dr. Aziz said, I can take everything out. So I think he's referring to the hardship one. Whereas I don't follow that, but there are people that say you only give zakat on 50,000 every year. That's what I'm trying to make. Is that what he's trying to say? Because there's a hardship withdrawal at CAT. If you go read the literature, right? And that is 50,000 maximum. But that's what's called hardship withdrawal. Yes. But his wordings seem like it's hardship.
Okay.
It's not anything. That's
I'm
what
not sure if he's referring to that.
Okay.
Or not.
That's what I was trying to get to. I totally understand, and
But from what I remember from the Fiqh Majma', from the Fiqh conference when he mentioned it, for example, for emergency situations, as I mentioned, you need to. So I don't know what he's referring to, if that's exactly what he's referring to or not. That once again is a hardship. If you ask me, or if you ask a mufti, that would be, something that constitutes a hardship. No, he's not talking about you give only on that amount. You give on the amount that you will count minus taxes and penalties. That is what he's talking about. The fatwa is very clear. Yes.
Thank you, Sheikh. My question is about the preferred opinion and about the zakatable amount calculation. And basically, it is from my understanding, from my 401k, I'm able to withdraw, I think typically most of it, except the 10% penalty and tax. But my question is, so do I, like, say a person has a tax slab of 30% or 35%? So should he calculate 35%, or should it be like, oh, I'm only going to withdraw if it's an emergency, if I lose my job? But then if you lose your job, then your tax slab changes. So it could be for person X, could be 35%, it could come down to 15%. So, I mean, what is the Sharia opinion about the correct opinion? Should the person calculate based on what his tax slab currently is, or if he loses his job? And
it'll be based on your current situation. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
3 points I want to bring to light. So one is the hardship rule. It's not like easy. It depends on the institution. They might accept the hardship rule. They might not accept the hardship rule. Again, regarding the ownership of the 401k, there is something called vesting period. Sometimes it is like immediate, sometimes like over a period of time. So it's not that if it's like 3 years and somebody shifts to a different job, he might lose the entire 401k amount. And the last point on absolute ownership is if somebody's thinking that if they have like $500,000 in the account and they're about to retire, it's not a guarantee that they are going to get that amount, because it depends on the tax rate on that year. If hypothetically US government goes into a war and they don't have any money, US government raises the tax rate to 90%, then they will get only 10% of the amount. So there is a certain uncertainty in the proportion of the ownership. So just wanted to bring this.
So I know what you're alluding to, that reasoning behind why some scholars would discourage. Yeah, that's what you're alluding to. I can clearly tell. But once again, it's open for debate, because gharar is not based on, because gharar, which is the unpredictability, it is not based on the current situation, right? That gharar, that could happen to anything, right? That could happen to your own income, that uncertainty. So will you then stop paying zakah for the current year? No, you'll still pay zakah. So Dr. Saab is alluding to the qawl, which the verdict where the scholars say these investments are perhaps discouraged. But no, this is once again open for much debate. And as you'll see, I've linked the article in the next QR code. Dr. Ma'an, if I was to summarize his entire fatwa, he is saying in a few words, al-abwab awsa' mimma nadhun. Right? The doors to these things are more vast than how we imagine in our limitations for them to be. They're very vast in terms of rulings. For example, there are even scholars who say that if such a provision is provided for you by your employer, then you don't even need to focus on where that investment is going. Is that the right opinion or not? That's once again debatable. But I'm saying many of these ijtihadat, they are open more than how we've limited them to be in our minds. I just want to, Ibrahim mentioned it very good. You should, I should perhaps mention it over here as well. He puts a beautiful qaida over here on the sixth, over here. Sorry. Even though there is some depth, even though there is some depth and evidence to back this opinion, talking about a particular matter, avoiding it is better and more religiously precautious. But this is what I want to highlight over here. Islamic jurists have long championed the principle that avoiding scholarly disagreements is a virtue. You accept that there's disagreements. وَالْإِخْتِلَافِ بَيْنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ رَحْمَةً. It's a mercy that our scholars have a difference of opinion. I don't want to mention his name, but there was a contemporary scholar who championed about 20 years ago that there should only be one madhab and people should be just following everything in one way. And that is it. Well then, number one, you're defying the way that the Prophet ﷺ made the tarbiyah of the Sahaba. That he accommodated their plurality. Because one person in their level of thinking and rationality and reason might be at the sky. Others might be at surface level. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us that provision to accommodate these differences. So yeah, what Dr. Saab is mentioning is a valid is an opinion among scholars. But then, like we've done with the points that we've presented here, each person can come about and just tackle a particular element or the nature of that opinion, as we did, right? As Dr. Saab sitting here, Dr. Azizur Rahman mentioned, so what about all these other years that there's no zakah being paid on these accounts? What to say about that? Yes. So he tackled that. Why? Because this is not God's word or the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam's word. This is an ijtihad based on the current climate that we live in and the current situations that we have, and every ijtihad is rewarded. And every ijtihad is rewarded. Please just put this in your mind. If you don't leave with anything else but this qaida, this one this one principle, that every ijtihad, every legal theory that somebody established based on trying their best to look at the principles of the Quran and Sunnah, every one of those is rewarded, even if it's wrong. The Prophet ﷺ said, if they are right in their ijtihad, they get a double fold reward. If they are wrong in their ijtihad, they still get one reward. In other words, Allah wants us to try. Allah doesn't want us, after we try, to battle it out if we disagree with each other. We can always agree to disagree in terms of contemporary issues. Even while sitting here, and giving these rulings, you might say, okay, you mentioned that this is the preferred opinion, the third opinion of Dr. Ma'an. You may still go back home and say that, well, I just want to stick to what my mufti has told me and it's more applicable to me. That's fine. Remember a qaida, another qaida I'll give you for the night. Al-fatwa laysa biwajib al-ittiba'. Al-shari'a wajib al-ittiba'. That legal ruling is not obligatory for you to follow. Take these as suggestions and recommendations. Sharia, whatever is crystal clear in the deen, the clear masail of zakah, that is fard on you to follow. A fatwa could change based on the changing of situations. A fatwa could be a strong recommendation. Either you accept it, you reject it, that is fine. Right? Or you go with what your mufti told you, or you try your best at your level, you try your level best based on the advice that you got from, for example, some Islamic finance expert. Alhamdulillah. Those who made their ijtihad and opted for a 401 account and tried their best to look at halal investments, Allah will grant them barakah because they tried. Those who are saying that this is not a preferred method of investing and I rather save my akhirah rather than get into doubtful matters, or I believe this matter is doubtful, Allah will give you barakah as well because you tried your best. Yes, any other questions, inshallah? Yes. The mic. Yeah, so I don't want this to the Q&A to just revolve around 401k. You can also ask questions from the other topics that we've discussed in the past, inshallah ta'ala. Along with this, I'm not saying limit your questions to this, because this is supposed to be a Q&A period. And if there are further Q&A that we need, then we can extend another session, inshallah. Yes.
So we talked about zakah on gold and silver. So what about diamonds and gems, and somebody is investing in diamonds and gem? So is zakah fard on that according to the value, like gold? Or you didn't mention anything about?
Yeah, I believe we did mention it. So we mentioned that zakah is fard on gold and silver if it's physically present, and it is at the end of the day, may it be a commodity, may it be an asset, or may it be for investment purposes. And we gave the different ways of giving zakah on that, gold or silver, in those situations. So in terms of Dr. Sab's question regarding, this one, right? Yeah. Yeah, so this is, once again, this jewelry besides gold and silver is in reference to jewelry that you have at home. But if somebody's investing in diamonds and precious gems, then it becomes a business. What was the word that you told me to use? And so or goods, right? It will be in that category. So they will give zakah on it. So for example, if you're investing in a stock that has diamonds or precious gems, that is now like a business, right? That is now like a business investment. So you will give zakah on it as you give zakah on, maybe short term or long term, as we discussed. You'll give zakah in that manner. So if it is short term, then you will give zakah. Sorry, if it's long term, you'll give zakah on the 2.5%, and if it's short term, you'll give zakah on the dividends that you get from it. Does that make sense, Dr. Shin? And if somebody has diamonds in their possession, there's once again two situations as well. Either you have it for business, or you have it for habit and jewelry. For habit and jewelry, you don't need to give zakah on diamonds and precious stones. The only thing that you need to give zakah on in terms of jewelry or your wives is gold and silver. That's number one. Number two, you have it for business. Yes, you'll have to give zakah on it. If you're a diamond merchant or you're selling rings and precious stones all the time, it's your livelihood, you will give zakah on the market value, 2.5% of the market value of those items. That's number two. Number three, Brother Muhammad Dawood brought up something very good. What if somebody does that to evade zakah? So they're buying diamonds because diamonds are not zakatable, but it's still an expensive investment, and you're doing that so you don't have to pay zakah. Then the answer to that is you talk to Allah on the Day of Judgment, right? If you're doing that to evade zakah, then once again, this is playing with the deen. Anything. It could be precious commodities, yeah, and you're doing that to evade bizabt, right? You have $1 million art piece, and you're not giving zakah. That's all you're utilizing, and you're not being diligent in this regard. Once again, that's your taqwa between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are you after all doing this for? So inshallah, please raise your hands. And this brother's been raising his hand for a very long time, Brother Yusuf. And then Nu'man, and then Uncle Mir. Yes.
Thank you. I have two questions. So the first question is that if you have a bit of everything, so each piece is not up to Nizab, or you have a bit of everything all over the places. So how do you calculate the zakat on everything together?
So you'll do it based on the silver standard. As we mentioned in the first session, you will count 2.5% of, in terms of like commodities, like you have gold, you have silver, you have cash,
Yes,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So in those situations, you have a savings, you have a checkings account. Once again, investments, count them as per the guidance that we gave on investments. But these miscellaneous commodities, random commodities, you will count it based on the silver standard. You'll give 2.5% of the total amount in zakah.
Then the second thing is that a family savings, maybe you have a family savings for all your family, your wife and your kids. So, and if it reaches Nizab, do you have the ability to pay zakat on that?
Sorry? I didn't understand.
A family
Put your
savings.
mic.
A family savings.
Yeah.
If you have maybe if money that is meant for the family upkeep,
Yeah.
do you pay zakat
Yes,
on that?
there's zakah on that as well. There's zakah on savings accounts. Like we mentioned, even if it's for a particular reason, like a health savings account, there's still zakah on the total amount of that. So if, for example, the expense is set in stone, that this is going to for sure be spent on a particular matter that I'm dealing with my family, then you can minus that from the total amount. But if it's unknown and it's just sitting there for years and accumulating in that savings account, then you have to give zakah on the entire amount, 2.5% of that. No, so tamlik, the concept of tamlik does not even come to question here. Yeah. Sure. No, you have to. It's fard. There's no disagreement here. Either she gives zakah on her portion and you give zakah on your portion, but this is a mandatory element. Barakallahu feekum. Yes, come here. Oh, Nu'man.
Imam
Sorry.
Sahib, so it's just for clarification, say I calculate my zakah on March 1st. On March 1st, I have business inventory $10,000. But I have credit card loan $8,000 because I used this credit card to purchase the business inventory.
Sure.
Now, what would be my zakatable amount?
$2,000.
Simple questions.
Inshallah. So you will minus debts from business. Yeah.
What about someone buy the houses, different houses for rent purpose?
So we discussed that. So that is once again an investment. You'll give 2.5% of the minus the cost that you get from the rent that people pay you. You will not. Yeah, only the rent. You will not pay on the value of the home. But if you're keeping the home for the sake of investment, then you'll pay 2.5% of the market value of that.
Islam.
Alaikum salam.
When we are calculating the price of the gold, right?
Speak up, brother.
Price of the gold, right?
Yes.
So we might have purchased in India or while
Exactly.
traveling. So now presently we are located here. How do we calculate?
Very simple. I think you were perhaps not here when I mentioned it. Either you can just check up the price of the ounce today online from they have these, not from Sheikh Google, but what do they call it, like Ampax and others who keep the value updated every day. These institutions, these financial institutions, or you go to a jeweler simply and say, what is the market, what is the value of this gold today? And you will give zakah on that jewelry in that likely manner. So very simply, if you write, as Ibrahim mentioned, you'll get suggestions from reputable companies. Gold ounce price today. Keep a small scale from Amazon. If you're not buying more gold, then just record how many ounces you have at home, right? Or how many grams you have at home, and just keep that in a note that, okay, this is what I have in terms of gold at home. And then every year, what you do is when it comes time to calculate the zakah, you just find the total value of those grams, and you give zakah on that. So a question came about in one of our private sit-downs, brothers were drinking coffee, that if a wife possesses gold and it's hers, but she has no cash, and the husband doesn't have the ability to pay zakah on her behalf, as an ihsan, once again, not as an obligation, as an ihsan. Anything the husband pays for zakah on behalf of his wife is a good will favor that he's done to her. It's not an obligation. Many communities, they make it seem like it's an obligation. So what to do in that situation, mathalan, where the husband was paying zakah every year from his wealth for the gold that his wife had? And especially in the Indo-Pak context, we give a lot of gold at times as muhur, or just as a goodwill, right? So what to do in that situation? She has to dissolve her gold in order to, whatever amount it will take for her to pay zakah on that gold, she has to dissolve that. Otherwise, it's the nas of the ayah directly. وَالَّذِينَ يَكْنِزُونَ الذَّهَبَ وَالْفِضَّةَ. Whoever keeps their gold and silver and they don't give their dues on that, right? Then they have a severe punishment. As Allah mentions in the next ayah of branding, their skin will be branded by that same gold. That was a means of enjoyment for them in this dunya. It will be branded like how a cow is branded. So she has to dissolve the amount of gold in order for her to fulfill the dues that are on her of the zakah. And the mercy of Allah in the akhirah is greater than that. Yes. Any other questions?
Assalamu alaikum.
I have a question about some organizations come here and ask for money for orphanage or making well in Africa or something. So are those zakatable areas?
Yeah, so long as you've done your due diligence and your homework in regards to a particular charity institution, I mentioned the whole concept in detail, what classical scholars say, as well as what modern scholars say in reference to these institutions. So I'll summarize it for you once again. Classical scholars say that charity organizations, they also need to relieve themselves of every zakah that they get through the year. Modern day scholars, once again, very slightly summarizing it for you. Modern day scholars, they say that they act like Baytul Mal. So even if they don't discharge the entire zakah in that year, your zakah is still accepted. When your zakah is still accepted because you gave it to the Baytul Mal, as it would be given in the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. That's how they look at it. This is my opinion at the end of the day. So do your due diligence regarding that organization, and there's no need to OCD. That are they actually, after they've given you your word and after you've checked data and after you check the reviews, I would say reviews nowadays also suffice on those zakah organizations, that they are legitimate people and they are perhaps building wells and facilitating for different individuals who don't have the provisions to eat. Perhaps they're giving them food through that zakah. So based on the modern day opinion, that is all allowed. There's no issue in that regard. The classical opinion, it speaks to the concept of tamlik, which that faqir or that poor person needs to be made the owner of that zakah. However, that's the classical opinion, and it's very impractical and impossible at times to do with these zakah situations. So we will basically take the ruling that they are like the Baytul Mal, who are facilitating on your behalf. Baytul Mal is basically the home of wealth which they had in the Khilafah of the past, and they would disperse wealth from that as needed. And if this is not agreeable to you and it's difficult to digest, then find fuqara and needy people that you genuinely know. And it's not impossible, right? Actually, that was one of my purposes for traveling to Jordan and seeing these, mukhayyamat, what they call the tent places or the encampments, and that they built there for the refugees. That was one of the main purposes I went, to get legitimate contacts from the ulama who are there in order for me to send my zakah. Because for me, although I mentioned the fatwa, it might be uneasy for me to follow, right? I'm not obligated to follow a fatwa, like I mentioned. So if uneasy, then find legitimate sources, or inshallah we can even guide you to legitimate sources. If you're comfortable, then understand a zakah organization, a charity that has good reviews and people support it, and there's a backing of ulama to those charity organizations as well who endorse them, mathalan, then don't overthink the matter. And if you are going to overthink the matter, then once again find your own contacts. Yes.
They might not mention that this is zakah eligible or not eligible. So you have to mention that, hey, I'm putting this money as my zakah. So make sure you take those boxes correctly, because if you don't, then it might not be a zakatable thing that they might be taking it for, and then there's another.
Yes. This is being recorded.
Assalamualaikum. So I had one question. It's a practical one. Suppose you are sending your zakat funds back home to a family that you know for sure are hand to mouth, but they might also have saved for like a wedding in the family, their daughter or granddaughter, just the amount of gold that they might be having to pay zakat themselves. So how do you reconcile that fact?
So like we mentioned in the past sessions, that urf and the way people live and the general habits are taken into great consideration in terms of fulfilling the obligations. So we know from various back home contexts that if that is something that they don't have, perhaps their daughter or the female in that family will never ever be able to get married. Hence, when the scholars will look at these situations, they'll look at it not as a general situation, it'll be a case-by-case situation. If, for example, in that situation, if the family, when they didn't have the gold at all, it will be very, very difficult for their child to, in that context, get married, then this will not be counted as part of their nisab. The gold will not be counted as a part of their nisab. And we mentioned a few examples in the previous weeks as well. It is known perhaps that this family has the ability to cut down. But if they cut down, then that's going to impact them severely socially. Like Muhammad Dawood brought up the example of private schools in Egypt. That if they're not going to private schools in that particular region, then it's a given. Your child's going to be a druggie, which we call umum al-balwa. So even though generally, when cutting down in that situation, in a general context, like for example, where your child will not be impacted, that perhaps would be the advice if there was not going to be a negative impact. But in that particular situation where he's mentioning where the impact is guaranteed because it's happening in society, then those things would be minused out from what they call the threshold or the nisab of a person. Does that make sense?
Jazakallah.
Jazakumullah khair. I think Auntie has a question as well. So, Brother Amin, if you can pass the mic there.
Can you?
If you what? If you buy a car, and then what's the second thing? Okay, so once again, that will be
Can you repeat the question?
The question that Auntie is asking, what if you buy a car for somebody through zakah money, number one, and number two, if you're remodeling somebody's home with zakah money, is that allowed or not? So generally in these situations where you're doing zakah one-on-one, tamlik is something that is necessary, making them the owner of that wealth, making them the faqir or the needy person the owner of that wealth. And then like we mentioned that in personal situations, dictating and making the zakah conditional will nullify that zakah being called zakah. But if you perhaps reach out to that person and say, look, this is at the end of the day your ownership and you're requesting a car, that is why we would say, highly recommend, if it's a trustworthy individual, that you use it for your needs, and inshallah will perhaps facilitate whatever is left over or you can't take care of later on. For example, if you need it for other needs, we'll give you that and we'll help you out in that regard. I'm giving you a practical solution, right? Rather than a fatwa. Then that will be fine. And they actually use it for the car. Even in terms of the situation of remodeling. Now, remodeling does not mean that they have an adequate place to live, but you just want them to, be more happy in their abode. It's actual genuine needs, right? That you're going to say, this is your ownership, but we request, or once again, based on your request that you need help remodeling the house, we would say, use these funds there. And like we mentioned in the car example, any other aspects that you need to fulfill, inshallah, will cater for that. But tamlik is necessary for one-on-one situations. You cannot dictate at the end of the day. If they, for example, they came to you and they said, I need a car, can you help me out? And you give them that zakah money, and you said it's based on your request, so fulfill whatever you've requested. But then they go ahead and, they buy the latest iPhone, mathalan. You cannot interfere. You cannot say anything to them. That is why I would say if it's a personal relationship, then try to fulfill these things out of goodwill and sadaqat. Because zakah, at a personal level, you cannot dictate what to do with that money. Yes? Yeah, so as we discussed, Auntie, last week, we should avoid harmful dependency. If they become dependent on you, then generally the scholars, they discourage that from being a place where you give zakah, right? That to the extent of laziness and unwillingness to make an effort themselves. One is they have a genuine need. For example, that they're disabled, they can't work at all. Wallahu alam. But one is they are able, but mashallah, you've been so kind as to facilitate for them every year that they see this as an income coming forth every year for them. So this is what we mentioned. Then one should reconsider providing continuous support. Although their zakah will be accepted if those people are in need. But year after year, year after year, year after year, what is the purpose of zakah? In a permanent damaging situation, yes, it is of help. In a temporary, needful situation, it is to push that person to reintegrate and be part of society. As we mentioned, the athar from the Prophet ﷺ, the narration that a person came to him, the first time he gave him, the second time the person asked, the Prophet ﷺ gave him the money. The third time he taught him a trade. He said, learn how to cut wood and sell wood. And this person then thanked the Prophet ﷺ for providing him this, financial independency that Allah facilitated for this person through their own trade. In temporary situation, what is zakah? What is the functionality of zakah? To push a person to get back onto their feet. Yes, we understand if there are permanent damaging situations, that could be a constant place or an area where you can discharge your zakah, fulfill your zakah. So what we should do in this situation, provide guidance and encouragement for the recipient to seek work or training, or offer support in ways that empower those people to become independent, such as funding an education or a skill development for them. Once again, not with zakah money, out of your goodwill. Try to do that. And if that doesn't even work, perhaps sometimes we need to help them learn the hard way, that you need to yourself stand up and, become independent. Yeah. So the threshold. If a person possesses, So if a person possesses about $8,000-ish in according to today's date, then they are not an area, they will not be a recipient of zakah unless, for example, minus costs. Unless, for example, if they incur costs and then minusing those costs, they go back under, $6,000, $5,000, or $3,000, whatever, under that threshold, under the gold nisab. Then once again, they will be people who deserve your zakah. So to make it clear again, sorry, I'm having a stomach ache. If they're at, for example, $8,000 at today's day, and they have that without any, and they have no minuses on that, no debts, no credit card payments, they don't have any expenses, and they're just constant at that, they cannot take your zakah in a general context, right? In a general context. Once again, we always have specific situations that, for example, Dr. Saab discussed and Muhammad Dawood mentioned about the school. And once again, if they go under that, so for example, they're at 7,000, then you can give them your zakah. So of course, for the nisab, you will use not cash, rather the value of the cash based on what the nisab originally is. So the nisab originally is about 85 to 87 grams of gold. And for silver, it's about 612.36 grams. And like we mentioned, the other way to look at the nisab is that if you have the $8,000, then you are the giver of the zakah. If you have under that and you possess the silver nisab, then you are a taker of zakah. Does that make sense? Inshallah. No, inshallah we'll continue. Just general pains.
Sorry to hear that. So it's a follow-up question on buying second home. So what if someone buys land, like, thinking I will sell when it goes up, price goes up? So
that's an investment. So you will give zakah on the market value of that land.
Current price.
Yes. 2.5%. Any other questions, inshallah? So what I'm working on right now, in case nobody has any questions, what I'm working on right now, I have never ever found a thorough presentation from any scholars on zakah, encompassing the leniency of madhahib and encompassing the various provisions that a person perhaps has in today's day and age based on the special situations, like we mentioned, the wedding or the school. I haven't found something that is detailed enough on investments. I'm inshallah working on that as a motivation from this session to write something, maybe a book or a presentation that could be easily shared around with the Muslim communities around the world, inshallah, hopefully making it encompassing. So your du'as for that. It's going to take a lot of homework because sometimes you have to take from other madhahib in order to fulfill a certain situation. Like we mentioned, the Maliki madhab. Your sister is so in need and you don't even have enough sadaqah to give her. The only amount that you have, that is not your sister, your mathalan, your spouse or your spouse or your son. So what to do in that situation? All of the al-a'imma al-thalatha, Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i and Ahmad, they say you can't give them zakah. You have to find other means. It's only Imam Malik who gives a provision in this regard. But you won't find that in various zakah presentations or books. So to encompass these leniencies, I'm working on the classical aspect of it, and hopefully in terms of the more modern day aspects, I'll talk to people like Dr. Ma'an and put it for review to the committee of muftis and have something that will be like a guideline, that we can stick to until the time changes, until, I don't know, we go back to sticks and stones and horses, if that happens, Allahu A'lam.
So,
but until then, until then, inshallah, hopefully this will be a guided standard. Yeah.
So want to mention that we didn't mention the land irrigated kind of a zakah, which is 10%. So many scholars consider your investments to be of that one. If you guys are invested in Amana funds, you can go back to the website and check it out.
Yeah.
So in that case, they calculate based on what you profited over the year instead of what you have invested as an amount. but then that is not 2.5%, that is 10% on the profit. So
That's one ijtihad.
that's
Just
one
say
another,
that.
another ijtihad.
Yes, that's one ijtihad, and it's not something that is wajibul ittiba' that you have to follow and take. So they base that 10% on the masail of land. Look at that. So their ijtihad took them, their legal theory took them to land in terms of how to look at investments. Would that, yeah, so of course.
So, yeah, if you, there is, for example, if you have too much, you know, so there is like, it depends, right? There will be more zakah in certain circumstances with 10%, but on certain circumstances there will be no zakah because this year this did not increase at all, right? You had $10 million and it is still $10 million. There is no increment, so you pay no zakat based on that calculation.
So if that's if you take that qawl, right?
Yeah, if you take that call. So there are so many different rulings on it. I want you to go on the deductible one. It was a little confusion on the deductible when you said yes or no, the recent slide. So it's a little confusion. When you say deductible, it is deductible from the zakat value or it is...
No, this is only on liabilities. It's
no, some of them was not liability. It's a debt also.
No, so it will be the debt would be of a liability nature.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was one no and then rest of them was yes. It was I think the newest one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is only one no. Debt's not repayable in 12 months.
Yeah. So those that's in reference to liabilities and not exclusive to cash debts.
No, so where would a mortgage payment lie?
So the mortgage payment, I think we mentioned that, right, in the previous slides, that was a specific situation.
Yes. Deductible liabilities for that. When you say
That's not
deductible,
really.
that means you can deduct that. So you cannot deduct that is actually the line for mortgage payment. That's not repayable in 12 months. Means you have a 15-year loan.
Yeah.
Again, inshallah, Islamic banking loan. But
like I mentioned to you, there's that ikhtilaf among scholars regarding the mortgage, because at the end of the day, it is something you possess and
so basically you don't consider that. That's why I understand that is a no and rest is yes. That line goes into that.
You're saying this one, right?
Yes. So basically you are not deducting that. So for example, I have 100.
You're not deducting, correct?
Yes.
Based on this qawl. Yeah.
Yes. So means deductible means it's not about whether you pay zakah or not. Basically
you're not deducting. Yeah.
You're not deducting means you're paying zakah.
Exactly.
So it's yes is actually you're not paying zakah on rest of them. It's actually deductible.
So yeah, let me rephrase that once again. So summary of debt and deductions, liabilities for zakah. So do you deduct zakah or not? Right?
No, you deduct from the zakah calculation.
No, so do you deduct from the total? Do you deduct
assets from the assets you deduct?
Yeah, do you deduct it or not? That's what you're trying to
say. So for example, I own $100,000, but I have $100,000.
Sure.
So now if I'm supposed to pay within this year, because probably I have it right now, but it is short-term loan, repayable short-term liabilities to be paid within that year, you deduct that much within that year.
Mm-hmm.
Not so that technically it's zero now. You have no ownership because you're supposed to pay $100,000 back within that year. So many scholars calculate that amount that you're supposed to pay for the year only for your mortgage payment.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of that you still have to consider for zakat. If that makes sense. Like when you're deducting how much you owe from the ownership, now it is the other way around.
Okay. Let's make that more clear, inshallah.
Yeah, it is. Because you just said, will you pay zakat? So technically, you don't pay zakat on the yes items. You only pay zakat on the no items.
Yeah. So does
that make sense?
That was. So deductible, it says, look, deductible on top, meaning will you pay zakah on those items or not? Right? So that is where the yes.
No, it is when you deduct that item for your zakat calculation or not. For example, I have $100,000 with me, a year has passed, but I have to just pay $100,000 as a loan right now. So I have to deduct that $100,000
from your
if it is within that year.
If
it is beyond year, when it says, that's why you will see examples of 1 year, 12 months, right?
Yes.
Or repayable in the year. That means if you are supposed to pay that $100,000 within a year, then you can deduct all of that. Yes, you can deduct all of it, and technically you don't have $100,000 because you're going to pay that. So you pay zero zakat on because it's zero, right?
بالضبط.
Yeah, so it is a deductible item. So that's why it was, I didn't mention it earlier, but I thought people would understand, but this is an important place. And that's why when it comes to mortgages, you have, yeah. So this is the deductible items. So whenever you sit to calculate zakah, when you find a date, right, then there are certain, like you do taxes, there are deductibles, right? You can deduct certain things. Similarly, here also the things that you can deduct, even though you have that money, but you can deduct, like you will not consider that to be your money if those are yes under those items. If they are no, that means where the mortgage would lie in the debt payable in more than 12 months. So that's why you don't deduct those things.
Yeah.
Because you have $100,000 mortgage, but you are not going to pay it in this year. Yeah.
So
you don't deduct.
Inshallah, maybe I can write that more clearly for the sake of understanding.
Yeah, inshallah. It is just a summary, but again, usually people, deduct the whole 15-year mortgage and for the next 15 years.
No. Yeah. Are they? Yes. Jazakumullahu khairan for that, brother. Are there any final questions? Jazakumullahu khairan. So I think we'll conclude the workshop over here. We don't need an extra week. Do you think we need an extra week for questions, or everyone's good? We're good, inshallah. Yeah, I'll refurbish the slides.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, Imam Mazhar, for having these classes, because it should be as important as our salah. And nobody is going to question, maybe inshallah Allah will not question us on why you paid extra zakat. Right? That question is sometimes, it will always be the other way around, where we lack. Similarly, extra salahs, right? So it should be considered as a ibadah.
Yes.
That is the important aspect. It
Exactly.
always comes with the salah, right? The third pillar of Islam, shahada, salah, and then zakat. Even before Saum, the Ramadan is coming, and even before Hajj, right? So it is the third pillar. So that's a very important. That's why I personally try to learn, like how would you try to learn salah? To better it, you have to learn about zakah, because you have to make sure that you're not missing on that main obligation.
Jazakumullahu khairan for everyone that attended. And Jazakumullah, Brother Ibrahim, for providing your input and clarities as well. May Allah make us people who benefit from His halal provisions. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to fulfill the dues for those provisions as well in the best of ways. Once again, may Allah accept this from us, and hopefully anticipate a beautiful presentation or a guideline that we can make for the benefit of all Muslims in these specific matters, as well as the general matters of zakah.